Okay, give me a second to review my notes. Because I want to go back to something you said earlier. Here it is. You said that everyone defines his or her motion of being at the causal level. If that's the case, and assuming that soul is intelligent, why would any soul choose to be impaired mentally, emotionally, or physically?
How do you mean that?
Let's say that soul entered a body, but chose to be closed-minded, stupid, and generally a blob. Why would an intelligent consciousness choose this and then imprint it on their DNA so their life is made more difficult, or at least more boring?
Let me ask you a question. Why would God impose this same condition on a person?
But you're starting with the assumption that God exists.
Make this assumption and then answer my question.
I know what you're implying, but why would either God or soul impose these, at least from my point of view, stupid decisions?
It has to do with complex systems and their inherent rules of dynamics.
Could you be a bit more specific?
In order to expand and ultimately support diverse life forms, the universe required an incalculably complex system of interrelated principles and rules. The more complex this system is, the more dynamic are its poles of interaction. Think of it like an uncut diamond. When you shine a focused beam of light on it in a dark room, there's only a muted glow, but if you facet the diamond, making it more complex, it spreads light in a radiant pattern upon all the walls of the room. Complexity works in a similar manner with consciousness. It facets human experience and spreads the light of consciousness upon all the walls of experience, including ignorance, stupidity, wickedness, beauty, goodness, and every other possible condition of human experience. The formless consciousness is not stupid in choosing to experience something that we might deem difficult or boring. It's simply acknowledging that the reality membrane of Earth requires it. No one can live within this reality membrane and be untouched by the dynamics of the human experience. No, one's exempt from difficulties or pain. Does that prove that every one of us makes stupid decisions? No, it only proves that we live within a complex world. That and nothing more.
Not to sound defensive, but you'd agree that some have easier lives than others.
Yes, but it's not relevant to the intelligence of the formless consciousness.
Okay. So is it related to the age of the formless consciousness?
Are you asking if the formless consciousness, as it gains experience, becomes better at selecting its motion of being?
Exactly.
The formless consciousness looks upon hardship and ease, the way you might look upon the negative and positive ends of a battery. With relative indifference, I would imagine.
There's no difference, is that what you're saying? No value to being an Einstein versus a Hitler? I don't believe that.
The choice is not made to be evil or wicked, or to select a life path that is excruciatingly difficult for oneself and others. Nor, in the case of Einstein, did he choose to contribute to humanity's understanding in a way that permitted the creation of nuclear weapons. In the formless consciousness of these individuals, prior to their most recent incarnations, they didn't make choices to harm or help humanity. They made choices to experience aspects of this reality membrane that would contribute to their own understanding.
So, you're saying that the soul chooses its motion of being according to its selfish desires? It doesn't think about the greater good at all?
It doesn't need to think about the greater good. That's what the unification force does.
It's an interesting philosophy. We can be as selfish as we desire, and leave it up to God to make our selfish, clumsy actions into something that contributes to the common good of humanity. Is that what you're really saying?
No. I'm saying that God, working through its unification force, orchestrates the intermingling of life in order to bring about transformation in the universe. God is like the cosmological alchemist who transforms the selfish interests of the one into the transformative conditions for the many.
Then you're saying that God solves all of our human frailties. We can do anything and it doesn't really matter because he'll fix it. If this philosophy were taught in our world, we'd be in sorry shape.
While it may not be taught in a formal way, humankind is unconsciously aware that this is the way it works.
On this point, I have to disagree with you. Selfish interests, evil intent, stupidity. These are not the traits of a responsible society, and I don't know of anyone who believes that we should act in this way and then let God perform damage control or mop up after our poor judgments.
You misunderstand. Perhaps I'm not explaining this very well. Let me try again. First, the selfish interests of the formless consciousness are to facet its consciousness in such a way that it can receive and radiate the unification force. In so doing, it can become consciously connected to this force and knowingly become a conduit for it into a broad range of reality membranes. Now, the formless consciousness selects reality membranes to enable the facing of its consciousness. None of this is done with an attitude of universal contribution or noble purpose. However, this isn't a result of selfish behavior as you think of it. It's a result of its nature. The way it was designed. I'm not saying that God cleans up after our messy mistakes. I'm saying our messy mistakes are not messy mistakes. Again, we live in a complex system of interdependent reality membranes. You can think of these membranes like scales on a snake, and the snake represents the collective human consciousness. Each scale protects the human soul and, collectively, propels it through its environment, in this case, the multiverse. The messy mistakes that we individually and collectively make are as responsible for the existence of the multiverse as are the noble contributions.
Let me see if I got this right. You're saying that our mistakes, both as individuals and as species, make it possible for us to exist, so, therefore, they're not mistakes?
As I said earlier, complex systems require a near-infinite range of dynamics in order to sustain the system. Our reality membrane is form-fitted to the complexity of our universe, which in turn created the environment of Earth and its various life forms. Yes, our mistakes, our individuality, is a central part of our ability as a species to sustain itself in the face of a complex, interconnected structure of the quantum world and the cosmos. The selfish motivations harvest the experience that facets our consciousness, which in turn are harvested by the unification force and used to transform reality membranes into passages through which a species can return to the God state. The mistakes weigh equally in this process, as do the unselfish contributions. Nothing is wasted.
If this is all true, why even worry about the animus or anything else? Just let God take care of everything.
Because the animus are not connected to the unification force.
Why? I thought you said everything was.
The formless consciousness doesn't select soul carriers that don't utilize DNA as its formative structure. It knows that these structures are not able to connect to the unification force, and therefore, cannot be trusted.
And they can't be trusted because?
Because the unification force is what brings coherence to incoherence, and purpose to chaos. Without it, physical structures tend to ebb and flow in stasis, which is to say, they don't transform.
How did this happen?
What?
That the animus became an independent race unconnected to God?
You've heard the story of the fallen angels?
You're talking about the Lucifer rebellion?
Yes. This story is misrepresented in biblical texts, owing to the fact that the authors of these texts didn't have a sufficient understanding in which to define cosmology or physics. The central race designed the higher life forms, and this includes a wide range of beings that operate within the quantum world and the reality membranes therein. Among these beings are what we commonly refer to as the angels, who are intermediaries between the soul carriers of humanoids and the central race. There were some within the angelic realm that believed the central race was too controlling of the soul carrier structure. They felt that a structure should be created that would enable angels to incarnate within the reality membrane of Earth and other life-bearing planets. They insisted that this would improve these planets and the physical structure of the universe at large. However, the central race refused this proposal and a renegade group left to design a soul carrier, independent of the central race.
Hold on a moment. You're saying that Lucifer led this rebellion to create a soul carrier that could house the spirit of an angel, and the animus are the result?
It's more complicated than that. Lucifer, or what we have come to call Lucifer, was a very devoted servant of the central race. He was one of the forerunners of the angelic species, capable of powers that were diminished by the central race in subsequent prototypes.
Are you saying that angels are created? That they can't reproduce like humans?
Correct. Lucifer's personality included a strong sense of independence from his creators, and an even stronger sense that his creators were flawed because of their insistence that the humanoid soul carrier would exclusively house the formless consciousness, and not the angelic form. to Lucifer, this seemed unthinkable because the angelic form was superior in its capabilities and could be of great assistance to the physical life forms on Earth and other life-bearing planets. From Lucifer's perspective, humans and the higher-order species would be unable to transform themselves because of the severe limits of their soul carriers, or physical forms. Lucifer felt certain that without the collaboration of the angels, humanoids throughout the universe would become increasingly separated from their purpose as spiritual beings, and throw the universe into disarray, which would eventually cause its destruction and life within it, including, of course, angels.
Then you're suggesting that the Lucifer rebellion was simply a disagreement over this one issue.
Lucifer wanted to incarnate into this reality membrane the same way humans do. He wanted to become a collaborator with humanity to assure its ascension. While the Central race saw his intentions as noble, they feared that the angelic incarnations would become known as gods to their human counterparts, and unintentionally mislead humans, rather than co-create the ladder to the god state. This matter underwent a tremendous debate, ultimately forming a division between the angelic realm and the Central race. The loyalists to the Central race argued that Lucifer and his sympathizers should be banished for their radical ideas that could potentially create a lasting division in their reality membrane, and cause them tremendous turmoil. Lucifer, in wide-ranging deliberations with the Central race, negotiated a compromise that enabled him to take his group of sympathizers and prove the value of their plan on a single planet.
Are you saying that Lucifer was allowed to experiment on a planet?
Yes.
Okay. Before we go any further, are you talking about this in the context of myth, or are you essentially representing the Courtium view?
There are 3 ancient manuscripts in the ACO's possession that describe this story in an allegorical form, but the Courtium view, as you put it, is much more descriptive and definitive as a record of this cosmic event.
So, Lucifer conducted this experiment. Where, and to what result?
The planet is in a galaxy known as M51 to your scientists.
This is the same galaxy of the Animus.
Yes.
So you're really saying that Lucifer and his band of sympathizers created the Animus to be soul carriers for angels?
It's more complicated than that.
I certainly hope so, because this story is too strange for me to believe.
Be patient. We're moving into uncomfortable territory for most people. So take a deep breath and bear with me as I try to explain this. Lucifer created a synthetic physical structure that could accommodate the quantum requirements of an angel. It was a very effective structure, but induced a strong survival complex within the species, which eventually overpowered the angelic tendency of altruism and cooperation.
Why? What happened?
When the formless consciousness enters a reality membrane through a structure like a soul carrier, it immediately feels disconnected from all other forces, but its own. It's literally thrown into separation. In humans, this is more or less controlled through the subtle realization that it remains connected through the unification force, and this is because its DNA is designed to emit this feeling of connection subconsciously. However, in the case of the soul carrier designed by Lucifer and his followers, this connection was severed both consciously and subconsciously because the structure was not based on DNA, which is strictly controlled by the Central race. Consequently, it inclined this experimental species toward a very strong survival complex because it feared extinction so deeply, which is the result of feeling complete separation from the unification force. This survival complex created a species that overcompensated its fear of extinction by developing a very powerful group mind. The group mind compensated for the loss of connection to the unification force, creating its physical and mental corollary. It was the equivalent of unifying the species as a whole in the physical reality membrane of their planetary system. Thus, the angels that entered this system lost their memory of their angelic natures and became more interested in operating as a single collective, than as individuals. They became a concern for the Central race, and Lucifer was asked to dismantle his experiment. However, Lucifer had become attached to the species that he had helped to create. These angelic beings had developed over a number of generations a very sophisticated set of technologies, culture, and social order. It was like an extended family in many ways to Lucifer. So, he negotiated to modify his creation so they would no longer accommodate the angelic frequency or quantum structure, but that they could become self-animated.
How do you mean self-animated?
That they would become soulless androids.
And so this happened, and that's how we got the animus?
Yes.
It doesn't make any sense. Why would God, or the central race for that matter, allow Lucifer to create a race of androids? Didn't they know that these beings were going to become the scourge of our universe?
Yes, of course they knew. However, God doesn't design something as complex as the multiverse, and then control how everything operates.
But you said earlier that God orchestrates what happens through the unification force.
God orchestrates how the dynamics of the multiverse come together to form a unified, comprehensible data stream that can inform the next evolution of the multiverse. Most people would think that an all-powerful God would banish a species like the Animus, but it doesn't work this way because the dark side of predation, as in the case of the Animus, sparks resourcefulness and innovation in its intended prey.
And with a prey,
not just us, but the humanoid species as a whole.
Evil begets good. That's what you're really saying, right?
Again, it's not evil against good. The Animus don't consider themselves to be evildoers when they invade a planet. From their perspective, they are simply executing their plan to become reconnected to their sense of individuality and become, as strange as it may sound, more spiritual.
But when I asked you earlier if you knew what their intentions were with Earth, you said you didn't know.
I don't. However, I do know something about their intentions to re-engineer their soul carriers to be more DNA compliant. They want to introduce DNA to their soul carriers in order to transform their species. This is essentially what any race would do under their exact set of circumstances. In fact, you could even call it noble.
Noble? I don't see anything noble in trying to commandeer our planet and subject our citizens to genetic experiments and tyranny.
To us, no. But from a completely objective viewpoint, one can appreciate that the Animus are just trying to transform their species for the better. They don't have any other choice because without DNA, they're simply unable to connect to the unification force.
Why can't they contact the central race and ask for help?
The central race is well aware of the Animus, and consider them their most potent enemy. Perhaps they consider them unsalvageable. Or perhaps the central race invites the drama of having an ancient enemy that forces them to protect their most valuable assets. I don't pretend to know. But for whatever reason, the central race is not able or willing to assist the Animus in becoming reconnected to the unification force.
So whatever happened to Lucifer and his plan?
According to the Cordium, he's alive and well and completely reintegrated into his species as a member of high standing.
Just so I'm clear, we are talking about Satan, aren't we?
Theologians are left with a tattered tapestry of myth and legend, and from this, they've injected their own interpretations down through time. What we're left with is little more than the fiction of 1,000 voices, but it somehow manages to become known as fact. Satan, as we think of him, never existed. There is no countermeasure to God. God encompasses all dynamics. It has no polarity of itself that is beyond its reach, or personalized outside of itself. The story of Lucifer at a very high level was just described to you. I assume you can see some similarity to the version of the Lucifer rebellion depicted in the Bible, but the correlation, I'm sure you'd admit, is sparse at best. If you watch movies like Star Wars or Star Trek, they imply that extraterrestrials populate every planetary system in the galaxy and beyond. However, it just isn't true. Our planet is an extremely rare combination of animals and organisms. The universe that comprises our physical reality membrane is in fact hostile to life at an extreme level. And yet life somehow managed to emerge on our planet in the black depths of our oceans.
What does this have to do with my question?
Be patient, I'll get to it. I promise.
Okay.
The habitable zones within our universe would be analogous to extracting a drop of water from the Pacific Ocean every cubic mile, and defining it as the only part of the ocean that contained all of the potential conditions to bear microbial life. Then, extracting a single molecule from each of these drops of water, and defining it as the only part of the drop that could sustain multicellular life, and from each of these molecules, extracting a single quantum particle and defining it as the only part of the molecule that could sustain complex, sentient life forms like humans. The genetic library that thrives upon Earth is a form of currency that has no price tag. All I can say is that its value far exceeds anything that human thought could imagine. And with this incredible value, our planet attracts interest from a wide range of extraterrestrial races, and this is as true today as it was 1,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago. Objects of inestimable value and rarity, such as Earth, attract beings from outside our planetary system that desire to control them, which makes Earth an extraordinary object of attraction. It's precisely this attraction that has brought the concepts of evil to our psyche.
I followed you right up to the last sentence and then lost you. How did this attraction bring evil to our consciousness?
Aggressive ETs, seeking to quite literally own Earth, visited our planet approximately 11,000 years ago. These ETs brought their genetics to our native DNA, and in so doing, modified our human DNA, adding a more aggressive, domineering drive to our personalities. This predisposition divided the human species into the conquerors and the conquered.
I don't get it. You're saying that ETs impregnated thousands of our native population with an aggressive gene that brought evil into our consciousness?
These ETs were not so different in physical form than the native humans, and they were treated like gods because of their superior technologies and capabilities. It was considered a great honor to have intercourse with these beings, but only a few were selected.
So how did their DNA become so influential that it literally brought evil into our lives?
One of the yet-to-be-discovered properties of DNA is that it can communicate traits, particularly aggressive traits, without physical interaction.
Explain, please.
There are carrier circuits within the DNA that transmit traits and even forms of intelligence through a reality membrane that is subquantum. It's a tributary ingredient of the unification force that propagates new traits and understandings in the few to the many. It's what enables the transmission of a new insight or potent trait across a spectrum of a species that resonates with the insight or trait, and it does it without physical interaction.
You're saying that a single person could have an idea or trait that is deposited within their DNA, and then their DNA transmits this trait like a broadcast tower and everyone on the planet that's like them is affected? You're saying that a single person could have an idea, or trait that is deposited within their DNA and then their DNA transmits this trait like a broadcast tower, and everyone on the planet that's like them is affected?
Let me clarify some things you said. First, it's not one person. It requires a critical mass of several hundred for a personality trait to transmit, and perhaps only 10 or 20 to transmit a new concept or insight. In any case, one person is not sufficient. This is not an exact science yet, even to the ACO. Secondly, it's not transmitted like a broadcast tower. It's transmitted selectively to resonant DNA, and the effect it has isn't dependent on whether the recipient is like, or even similar to, the donor. It's dependent on the receptivity of their DNA. Some people open their DNA up to new innovations, others don't. This is the critical factor in whether the new trait or idea is successfully transmitted.
Okay, ETs with their aggressive personalities infected humans, and this brought evil tendencies to our race. Why would the central race allow this to happen?
We don't know.
But you said earlier that they would protect our planet with their best technology. Why didn't they protect it thousands of years ago?
This is a mystery. We don't know.
I assume this must be another reason that 15 doesn't want to rely on the Wingmakers for our protection.
He doesn't talk about it, but I'd agree with you.